up here, these, this is the East Parish Meeting House. These 1910 balustrades at the top were very ornate, and those are no longer on the building. And those were about the only things that were not replicated. And I read it was because they were too hard to maintain. They just didn't last long enough, and they were too hard to replace. So we still have a beautiful meeting house, just minus those little balustrades. Okay. The East Parish Meeting House is a Haverhill treasure, and this beautiful article was published in 2018 in Haverhill Life, one of our weekly good news newspapers in Haverhill. And it features a beautiful picture of the meeting house, and also features the bell, which we're going to talk about later in the show. And just this was one of our beautiful favorite articles, and we have it hanging inside the meeting house, so we just wanted to share it. Okay, we were a little curious about who are our fellow Zoom participants and history enthusiasts here. Well, I think we actually got to chat a little bit about to most of you before the show began. So I think we covered that. But if anybody is new, please feel free to chime in. We're going to talk about connections to the Whittier family, the architecture of the East Parish Meeting House, and a little bit more. And our presentation is in two main parts. Part one will cover the first building, which was built it was dreamed up in 1743, but it was actually built in 1744. It lasted until 1837. And at that time, the parishioners tore that building down and built a brand new building, which is the current building on the property. And we want to extend a thanks to Kaylee Parry Shaughnessy, Executive Director of Whittier Birthplace here in Haverhill, for this special opportunity to preserve East Parish Meeting House history and perpetuity. We had never really done a slideshow before, so it's been a great experience. Okay. We understand this will be posted up on YouTube. We will have an opportunity to make any adaptations at the end of the presentation. So we welcome all questions, comments, relevant discussion items, and corrections throughout our presentation in the effort to make it as great as it can be to preserve it for the next generations to learn about this building. And we have about 100 slides to show you. All right, part one is going to be 1743 to 1837, but first, just a little prequel. Entering Haverhill, Massachusetts, established in 1640. The story of the East Parish Meeting House begins with the settlement of Haverhill, Massachusetts as a frontier village in 1640, just 20 years after the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock and 10 years after the settling of Boston. Nathaniel Ward of Ipswich, a religious leader, and some men of Newbury were granted permission from the Massachusetts General Court in 1640 to establish a new frontier settlement of Puritans, mainly farmers. The land was first known as Pentucket, meaning place of the winding river. And Pentucket is still a name that we use a lot around this region. We have Pentucket Regional High School and lots of Pentucket names. The land was officially purchased from the Pawtucket Native Americans in 1642, a year after Haverhill's incorporation, for £3 and some shillings, and then Pentucket was renamed Haverhill after where the Ward family originated from in Haverhill, England. What you see on the picture there is a portion of the deed between Haverhill and the Native Americans. And you could see right here, John Ward's signature. He was the first one to sign this deed. And anybody want to guess, if you didn't read my caption yet below, anybody want to make a discussion about what these diagrams are? Anybody in the audience?
I know.
Okay. Anybody else want to have an idea of what these are? These markings? Okay, go ahead,
It's how the
Shannon.
natives signed it.
Thank you, Mikey.
Yes.
It's,
Yeah.
bow and arrow. They were bow
Yeah.
and arrow.
They're representing a bow and arrow, if you look closely, which I thought was pretty fascinating. The Native Americans didn't have a way to, I do see some signatures there, but what I read about was that
They're written
these
in afterwards.
bow and arrows were the Native Americans.
And there was a reason why the arrow pointed up and pointed down. It was something to do with their position in the tribe, whatever.
Oh, okay. It was mainly two Native Americans that signed this deed over to Haverhill. And it also talks about how many miles of land was received, but it originally included land that ended up being Atkinson and Plastow
Methuen.
and Methuen as well. So that was interesting. Okay, moving on. Okay. Just in case anybody's outside of Haverhill, Haverhill lies in northeast Massachusetts, about 32 miles north of Boston and 16 miles up the Merrimack River from the Atlantic Ocean. You can see right there Haverhill and the Merrimack River. And in addition to agriculture, the Merrimack River was very instrumental in some occupations of Haverhill. In 1690, Haverhill occupations included ketch and sloop shipbuilding and grist mill, sawmill, and woolen mill operations all along the Merrimack River. So it was a huge source of the economy for quite a long time. And the first parish in Haverhill was in the old center of town, present-day location of Linwood Cemetery, which is very close to overlooking the Merrimack River. And the first parish was led by wealthy proprietors who were descendants of Haverhill's original settlers. As Haverhill grew and the population diversified in religious views, occupations, and locations of homes further from downtown, 3 more parishes were created in the 1700s. The second parish to the north in 1730, and that was up and around the Haverhill-Plastow line on 125 in that area today. And the third congregation was to the west in 1734, and that parish is still flourishing as West Congregational Church. It's a beautiful church. They've made a huge addition on the back and the side, but you can still see the original meeting house at the front of the church. And then the fourth parish meeting house was the one that we're talking about tonight, the East Parish Meeting House, established in 1743. All right, Shannon.
All right. Yeah. Welcome to our presentation. I'm Shannon Hewey. The Hewey family have been citizens in the East Parish for many generations. My husband and I decided to get married at the East Parish Church. Sent out the invitations, and 2 weeks before the event, the ceiling started to cave in, plaster was falling off the walls, and fortunately my husband was a contractor, so he came in and made some quick repairs, and the service was lovely, but we've been working on the East Parish Church ever since that day.
Over 40 years.
Welcome. Yeah, a long time ago. And now to part 1 of the history of the East Parish Meeting House. The first 94 years, which were approximately the first 100 years from 1743 to 1839, in 1743, inhabitants of the east end of Haverhill petitioned the Massachusetts General Court for a separate parish, stating that the first meeting house stood near 6 miles from the east end of the East Parish. Permission was granted for what would become the 4th parish of Haverhill, the East Parish Meeting House. In November 1743, the first parish meeting was held at the house of Nathaniel Whittier. The house stood on Middle Road opposite the tract of land that became Walnut Cemetery. The Nichols family most recently occupied it, but it has since been torn down. A committee was chosen to select the location of the meeting house and reported at a later meeting that it would be erected at the south side of Turkey Hill near the southeast. And so, along a country road, which still is rural to this day, on the south side of Turkey Hill, the first East Parish meeting house was built in 1744.
Okay, and there you see one of the historic documents that I took a photo of and was able to put in here. And it says here that it was voted that Timothy Eaton, Anthony Colby, John Sanders, Peter Green, and Reuben
Courier.
Courier should consult where to set a meeting house. The judgment of 3 of them was to set the house at the south side of Turkey Hill near the southwest end of the hill. And that's where the historians have taken that. That's the original document where they took it from. So that's pretty interesting. Okay. This depicts the country road. It still looks like pretty much like that, but that's the second meeting house and not the first one. But we just wanted to give you an idea of how rural the neighborhood still is. Still pretty rural. A deed to the meeting house has never been found despite extensive searching in historic records and the Registry of Deeds, and even getting some help from the Registry of Deeds staff. Nobody could find a deed. Haverhill Gazette reporter Mike Labella stated in one of his articles about the meeting house that the meeting house, quote, sits on land donated by the family of Nathaniel Whittier. I recently asked Mike Labella about the source of that information, and so far he couldn't recall, but maybe we'll be able to come up with it or do some Whittier research. It might be a clue to how we might be able to find a deed, or it was just on land that was originated from the treaty with the Indians, so we're really not sure. But it came up later that it was an issue that we didn't have a deed, but we were able to find a solution to it. Okay.
Really remarkable record keeping that they wrote down what they decided in their meeting, and it survived for hundreds of years.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so fascinating at the Haverhill Public Library.
Yes, and we have one of the records books from about the early 1800s, and the library has this other one from 1743, and the writing, having to use a quill pen and everything. Let me go back to see that again. I mean, that's pretty amazing too, that we have that. It's almost 300 years old. And the detail that they had.
And the handwriting.
Okay. All right. The East Parish Meeting House was finished enough to allow it to be used for meetings by September 1744. And interestingly, about pews, they did not build the pews inside the meeting house, but the privileges for the building pews in it were sold at auction to the highest bidder. And parishioners either built their own pews if they won the privilege at an auction, or they just sat on benches around the edges of the room according to age, importance, sex, and social standing. And men and women sat separately on the benches. And the pews that they did have, we read that they were mostly square shaped. They're not long and narrow rectangles like we see today. Hey, Shannon?
The first minister, the parish erected a meeting house and settled a minister, Reverend Benjamin Parker, who was ordained on November 28th, 1744, at a salary of £100 annually, marking the official gathering of the church. And this is his receipt of being paid for the year.
Exactly. The ministers were in charge of the receipt books for collecting the money and giving out receipts and keeping records. And
we still have those old books with all who paid, every citizen in the East Parish area, what they were charged, why they were charged that, and their religious fees and their land fees, and who paid and who didn't.
Mm-hmm. And they were required to pay it was a tax. Instead of like a property tax like we pay now, this was the tax. It was a parish tax. Okay, the East Parish applied to the town for land for a parsonage, which was granted, and the parsonage was built for Reverend Parker, along with a barn right across from the meeting house in the location where my family and I now live. Parishioners, or I was just saying, parishioners were required to be part of a parish and were taxed according to their wealth, including animals. If they had oxen, though that was a high tax, and any, major animals, large animals that they had were taxed on. The minister kept the financial record book, and the early book, the first book, reflected the charges in pounds and shillings. However, after the Revolutionary War, this changed to dollars just about 1780, 1779 or 1780, a few years after the Revolutionary War, they changed the monetary exchange. At the time, East Parish Meeting House ministers earned about $200 or $250 a year, plus the privileges of living in the parsonage.
According to George Chase,
Mm-hmm.
1948, the parish. Blah, 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 blah.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
The parish was built and a schoolhouse was laid out and 2 burial grounds. Walnut Cemetery at the junction of Middle Road and Canosa Street is a setting of Whittier's poem, The Old Burying Ground, and is believed to be one of the parish's 2 original burying grounds. One account said another burying ground was up the hill behind the meeting house. I think we know for sure by the history of Walnut Cemetery that that was one of the original ones, but the second one really isn't identified. Farmers that lived in the area, they grew crops of corn and oat and rye, hay and apples. Horses were a mode of transportation. A few people had light carriages, and wagons were unknown until 1800s or later, according to Chase. Scuffles with the Native Americans were common, and relations with England were increasingly strained. Next, Bobby. Heads up.
Okay. Parker and the parishioners, that's Reverend Parker, they did have some significant disagreements, financial at first, over what he was owed. And as a last straw, they had a disagreement regarding Reverend Parker was not being supportive of the patriots of the American Revolution. Parker was believed to be a Tory and sympathized with the British. So over these disagreements, in 1776, just about when the Revolutionary War was going on, the meeting house doors were shuttered, fastened up for 12 months, and in 1777, the connection between the East Parish Meeting House Society and Mr. Parker, their first reverend, was dissolved, and Mr. Parker moved to his own farm, and according to Chase, is interred in the burial ground near the meeting house. I think when I get back to Massachusetts, I'm gonna go down there and see if I can find Reverend Parker's gravestone. If it's in Walnut Cemetery, that will confirm the connection that we suspect. Okay, Reverend Parker served for 32 years, and during that time,
30 couples baptized 334 children, 77 persons owned the covenant, which meant they accepted the teachings of the church. We don't have an illustration, which is very sad, or a photograph of the first East Parish meeting house because photography wasn't invented until 1826. The work details on the original 1744 East Parish meeting house.
sorry.
Yeah, funny. According to Chase, went like this. 1752, the galley floors were laid. In 1753, the windows were cut out. In 1768, the house was plastered. 44 to 1816, pews were built at different time by the people who paid and bought the privilege to build a pew. In 1793, the east end was clapboarded, the doors and window frames were painted. 1829, the first time meeting house was heated. They had 2 box stoves with long funnels through the windows that worked as chimneys. Prior to this, parishioners brought their dogs to church to help them keep their feet warm. Second minister, the Reverend Isaac Tompkin, was called to become the next pastor and was ordained March 1st, 1797, at a salary of $250 for the first year, plus the use of the parsonage, buildings, lands, and the woods. From that time until his death in 1827, for 30 years, Reverend Tompkins served, and all was satisfactory to all parties.
Reverend Tompkins was said to be a very beloved pastor. During his 11th year of service to the East Parish Meeting House on December 17th, 1807, Haverhill's renowned abolitionist poet John Greenleaf Whittier was born just down the road on his family's farm, which is pictured in this painting coming up in the next slide. The farmhouse was built by Whittier's great-great-grandfather in 1688, and the family members were considered hard-working Quaker farmers. The address is 305 Whittier Road today. John Greenleaf Whittier was able to make his living by his poetry, including his abolitionist poetry and as a newspaper editor. And here is a great place for any Whittier fans that have more details to go ahead and chime in.
Well, he was also a state representative for a while.
Oh, okay.
And then I'm pretty sure later he was in Congress, U.S. Congress.
Oh, okay, excellent.
This is a wonderful view, looking at exactly the way it is when you cross 110 today. That little bridge that they put in there, you can still see the horse barn there.
Yep. The house still there. The only thing that looks different is that the road is paved now. It still has some of these rock walls, and even a lot of the trees look pretty much the same. I got that painting right off of Wikipedia.
Can't see the little fisherman boy anymore.
Or the horse.
This is true. That's the barefoot boy from his poem, The Barefoot Boy. Did you know about that poem, Mike?
No, I don't know anything about Whittier.
Yeah, he wrote a lot of poetry, and one of his most famous poems was about the barefoot boy. So that's why that's painted into that painting, I'm sure.
I love that painting. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it is.
Isn't that beautiful? Have you ever seen that before?
No, I haven't. I'm familiar with the barefoot boy, but I've never seen that photo. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice.
Okay.
For those that might be interested, in other towns in Massachusetts, other historical towns, they've been more strict about preserving the historic roads. Like I live close to Lexington, which of course has because it's where the first battles were, the city councils and everything they've fought with everybody to have the colonial feel restored. So if you go walking in certain parts of Lexington today, it really does look a lot like that picture. Even some of the roads are still dirt. So that's a great trip to make on a Sunday or whatever.
Wow. Is that mostly through that park area, Mike, where their roads are unpaved?
Yeah, just look up the Minuteman. I forget exactly what it's called. The Minuteman trails or something. It's all wooded, just like it is in that picture, and the roads are dirt, and you can see on the left and the right, the cobblestone walls are all still there. Probably not the originals, but it looks.
I'm gonna have to make a trip down there.
But it looks similar, and there are wooden bridges and all of that.
Wow, cool.
And old barns.
Nice. Okay. Right.
Reverend Tompkins baptized 80 persons. We do not know if he baptized John Greenleaf Whittier. I don't think he did. It was not found in the records. The Whittier family were said to be Quakers, but it is also said that John Greenleaf Whittier worshipped at the East Parish Meeting House occasionally as a boy and young man before moving at age 29, 9 miles northeast to Amesbury, Massachusetts in 1836, where he lived for over 50 years and died in 1892 at age 84.
Okay. All right, in 1822, during Reverend Tompkins' time of service, unfortunately for the meeting house, the Second Baptist Church in East Haverhill was incorporated in Rock's Village, and the membership of the East Parish Church was diminished when many of those parishioners changed churches to go down up to the Baptist Church. Does anybody in Rock's Village know anything more about that?
Well, we've looked at a lot of deeds where people will leave a pew in a church, for example, to their descendants.
Oh,
And they would distinguish between the East Parish Church pew and the Baptist Church pew. And in fact, in one case, they had a pew in both churches. And so they left one pew to somebody and the other pew in the other church to somebody else.
okay.
Also,
Okay.
two different denominations. I heard that the East Parish charged more tax for than the Baptist. The Baptists didn't want to pay the congregational tax, so they sort of formed their own church.
Yes, I heard that too.
Okay. This
Hey,
next
speaking of John Greenleaf being being of the Society of Friends, I just looked this up quickly because I was curious, but it's unlikely that he was baptized because it's not something practiced by Quakers.
Right.
Okay. All right, thanks for finding that out, Mike. Okay, the next paragraph is about George Wingate Chase. He's the author of History of Haverhill. This book, if you want to know about the history of Haverhill, it's between 1640 and 1860. This book is 663 pages long. It's amazing. It's so comprehensive and thorough. And he actually was born in the East Parish in 1826, and he attended meeting house services a lot. His father was a Tappan Chase, who's pretty famous in the writings. He was had something to do with shoemaking, and he was a deacon at the East Parish meeting house. So his son George was always at the meeting house with him and intimately familiar with the meeting house. And Chase was very knowledgeable about Haverhill and all the residents and seemed to be the perfect person to author a book about Haverhill. And Chase wrote that Puritan religious services usually commenced at 9 in the morning and occupied 6 to 8 hours, divided by a 1-hour intermission for dinner. And Shannon and I were thinking most parishioners likely lived too far away to go home for dinner, so they probably brought their dinner to services and just had to stay all day, 6 or 8 hours. That's a long time. Reverend Tompkins died in 1827, and 11 years later, in 1838, Chase wrote this quote, "In 1838, the old meeting house that had withstood the elements for nearly a century was taken down and the present house erected nearly on the same site." However, the records show that financial support dwindled in the years after the parish had completed its new building. It had lost some parishioners to Rock's Village, and then another similar event happened. And a little bit more about George Chase. Only 6 years after publishing his volume, at age 41, he died, having completed many accomplishments in his relatively short life. And I was very grateful for that
He wrote
book.
that amazing book.
Yeah, he was only 34, 35 when he wrote this amazing, comprehensive book, thoroughly researched, and all kinds of references and where he got his material from, and very, very thoroughly researched all kinds of topics. Oh, I was wondering about how Chase published his 1861 book, because we only have the reprinting of the original version, and they didn't invent typewriters until about 1860, or they weren't widely available. So I'd be curious about if Chase wrote the history by hand or through typesetting or using typewriter, which must have been a brand new invention at the time. Something I'm curious about and hope to find out the answer to. If anybody has any information. Okay. And the final note of this section, we need another historian to write Haverhill's history from 1861 to the present, because it's already been almost 200 years since George W. Chase published his amazing book. So if you can think of any author that wants to write a most recent history of Haverhill, we should speak to them. All right, that's just an end of part one. Are there any comments, questions, discussion about part one before we go on to part two, which is the current building?
I have one question. Reverend Tompkins, we have recently been studying him a little bit, because our suspicion is that he may be the parson in the Countess poem. It mentions a parson ambling on his wall-eyed roan down the streets of the village, essentially, with his white hair flowing out behind.
Oh, yeah, I read a little bit about that. It is in reference to him. He
You think
was,
so?
yeah, he had long white hair.
Oh, very good. That's
Yeah.
good to know. Yeah,
Yep, I've just been reading all the historic documentation, and I came across that. Yes.
very good.
Interesting. Okay. Hi, I see my son Chris is on. Hi, Chris. Thanks for joining. I don't know, he's on mute. He's probably on mute. Okay, we're gonna move on to part two. Okay. All right.
Part two, 1838 to present, on the same site as the second and current East Parish Meeting House is built. In the new 1838 Meeting House, kerosene lamps replaced the candles of the earlier building. A big stove furnished the heat. The church was carpeted for the first time, and a bass viol preceded the later pipe organ.
Okay, and we have this really neat plaque on the left-hand side. It hangs at the current meeting house, and Shannon has a little bit of history about it. I think her husband Dave Hewey cut this plaque out.
Yep, and it was painted by Roberta Wentworth, who was
One of their neighbors.
Yep, it just is a historic plaque hanging up on the front of the building.
I love this plaque. It's the only way when I moved there. There's no other sign. Well, now we have one of those brown National Register of Historic Places signs, which we got after we got some grants. We had to do that sign, which is a really great sign. But other than that, this sign here was the only way we knew what this building was. We were, not local to Haverhill, so I love this sign. I think it's really neat. It kind of looks colonial, and anyway, we'll move on. Okay. Okay, calling any historic architecture buffs here, we're going to focus on the remarkable Greek Revival architecture of the East Parish Meeting House building, built in 1838. On the left-hand side, you've got one of the Haverhill Library historic photographs of the meeting house from the early 1800s, and you see that Middle Road was still a dirt road at the time. And in the middle there is a shot of the interior up on the upper level going up into the belfry. It's probably just about attic area right around here. But what I wanted to show was the enormous beams and how well built this structure is. When Shannon was applying for the National Register of Historic Places, and they did a historical structures evaluation and report. And it was really found that the building was, even though it needed a lot of restoration, the main structure of the building was very, very sound. And that was due to the efforts of the colonials in 1838. But I'm still amazed how they were able to build this solid building with enormous foundation stones, huge beams, and a very high steeple without the benefit of any of the modern day tools that we have. Okay. Shannon worked with Tim Orwig on the National Register of Historic Places application in 2011. So the next few pages are some excerpts from that report on the architecture of the meeting house. So it says, and this is a great view of it, it says here, the meeting house is a 1.5-story wood frame, remarkably unaltered rural meeting house. This spare clapboarded building has a front gabled form defined by an undecorated triangular pediment right here. No decorations up here. Simple wide corner and upper boards. But the fancy thing was the doors, and get to that in a moment. But Greek Revival architecture was getting popular across the United States between 1820 to 1860. People wanted something different from the British influence, so they decided to copy the Greek Revival. More details coming on that. Okay, here we have a close-up of the door, one of the twin front doors. So it says specific Greek Revival decorative elements included twin front doors with pilasters. So right here, very, very fancy for its time. And a horizontal covering resting on the columns. And then the windows were 20, they called 20 over 20 lights. There were 5 across and 4 high, and double sash windows. And up here is called a pediment, pedimented lintel. And it's a little hard to see because it's white on white, but it's just like a little, almost a triangle shape as a decoration on top of the window. So the building itself was plain, but they decorated the doors, especially in the windows, a little bit. Okay, so here you see the double entry facade and the decorative windows. And it is said that the double doors were determined by the parish practice of separate entries and seating for the men and the women. And these huge windows served to brighten the sanctuary because there was no electricity in the building when it was built, and it was 1925 before electricity became common in homes in America. And still today, there are no outlets in this building. Its electricity is brought in through a pole. You can see it right here. There's a pole with an electric box and 4 outlets, and we bring electricity in through extension cords into the building. Oops. Okay, the belfry, let's bring your attention to here. The belfry here is also clapboarded, and look at the detail on the belfry where the bell goes in. 4 bell openings, louvered right here, and topped with a trim board which sports a center drop pendant. So that's pretty fancy right there. It's really beautiful. The interior retains nearly all its original elements. The sanctuary here and the concave lobby, it bows out here. We'll show you in the next picture why. But the lobby right here where the bell rope hangs is only a few feet wide at its center point. But everybody enjoys ringing the bell. It brings a lot of joy to kids, to brides and grooms, to visitors, and all the neighbors around can hear it for quite a ways. I know you can hear it sometimes way down in Rocks Village.
Note how level the plaster is in that picture to the left.
How nice it is.
They're
They
gonna-
did. Yep. Beautiful job by Steve Vallant. Here is the view of the balcony. And it has this beautiful curve here. It's flat, then a curve, and then flat here. And the pews, there's 6 pews up here, and they're all curved. So it's really different and interesting up there in the balcony. Okay. All right, and then there's a view from the top of Turkey Hill down to the meeting house. And you can barely see the original parsonage. And then Millvale Pond in the back from the top of Turkey Hill. Back in the day, Millvale was not a reservoir, it was a river. And it was dammed up. Does anybody know around when? It was around maybe 1900. Well, this is 1910, so maybe 1900 or so. The river was dammed up to make a pond and eventually to back up our reservoir. Any comments or questions on that section?
Do you happen to know if there was any way to cross that reservoir at the time, like in 1800? I'm wondering because if you don't go across that, then it's a longer way from Rocks Village to get to the church.
Well, down at Thompson Road, there's a bridge that you can kind of cross. It used to be able to take cars across, but that is no longer. But you can cross, and you have to cross a little bit of the brook at one part. But I think probably the bridge went all the way across back in the day when it needed.
Interesting.
Have you ever been down there?
I haven't, no.
Oh, you have to check that out.
Exactly. I will.
Okay. All right, Shannon?
There's a conversation right now about rebuilding that bridge as a footbridge.
As a footbridge, how do you like that idea?
I like it.
Yeah, okay.
So there's a group of us talking about trying to create that.
Oh, okay.
Oh, great.
Shannon?
Congregation and ministers in the new building after Reverend Tompkins' death in 1836, and in the new building, the meeting house saw a succession of ministers who served a few years each. Mr. Stevens, Mr. Cushing, and 3 other ministers served sporadically over the next few decades. But without Chase's account past 1860 or surviving parish records, little is known about their tenures. In 1884, the Riverside Memorial Church was established about a mile down the road on Groveland Street, with East Parish Church as the mother church. This establishment further diminished the membership of the East Parish Church.
And I'll have to say, I have to make a correction here. He died in 1826 or 27, so I need to make that correction there. That's a typo. Sorry about that.
He's a liar.
Okay, from 1884 until 1906, the same pastor served both the East Parish and the Riverside churches. It was Reverend George L. Gleason, who was the last minister to regularly preach at the East Parish Church Meeting House. And for 18 years, he did that. And then at one point, services at East Parish Meeting House were changed to afternoons. You can't be in 2 places at once. So that even further diminished regular attendance at the meeting house. And we read the meeting house ceased to have Sunday weekly church services by about 1906. They still had occasional summer services, particularly marriages, memorials, funerals, anything like that was just as we have all those today. And early on, the East Parish Church Sewing Society maintained the building, holding many memorable harvest suppers at the church and assisting worthy charities. All right, the 1900s, in April 1928, a grass fire consumed 200 acres in the neighborhood, including the carriage sheds at East Parish Meeting House. However, the firemen were able to save the meeting house itself. And since that time, several anniversary services were held 1938 was the centennial of the current meeting house, and there was a service. And then there was a bicentennial service as well. In 1944, marking the 200th anniversary of the establishment of the East Parish Meeting House. But with the lack of congregation, the building began to decay. And maintenance has been an issue that we're trying to keep up with. In 1962, Donald Atwood, the chair of the Haverhill Board of Assessors, helped reorganize the East Parish Congregational Society, and he got together a group of 40 people to repair the roof, ceilings, underpinnings of the pulpit, clean it, paint it, put down new carpet, and hold a service. Okay, when Riverside Memorial Church burned in 1970, its congregation used East Parish Meeting House and even held communion classes there while they were rebuilding their own church. And I have a little bit in here about David and Shannon Hewey. David, Hewey, and Shannon Connor wanted to get married in the East Parish Meeting House, and they did in 1981.
Yep.
But Dave had to make some emergency repairs right before the wedding took place. And they've been caretakers extraordinaire for 42 long, wonderful years. And many other brides and grooms have married in the meeting house, but only the Heweys have been such devoted caretakers, leading the maintenance of the building for over 40 years. And I just have to give them a round of applause.
Hey.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Shannon. You guys are incredible. The whole community owes Dave and Shannon their deepest gratitude.
All right.
Thank you. And Mari as well. All right. Okay, in 2000, the steeple had been deteriorating and it was taken down and rebuilt by students at Whittier Vocational. And the Belfry Tower was supported, but then finally in 2006, the Belfry was removed for repairs. And then Shannon won a grant from the Essex National Heritage to plan fundraising and proper restoration of the building. All right, this is a little bit about the bell. Go ahead, Shannon.
Parish Meeting House bell, after we had removed it from the steeple in the bell house. This is the Holbrook bell. And in this picture, Dave had restored the bell wheel and it had been installed. It was cast, this bell was cast in 1848 in Medway, Massachusetts, by Colonel George Halden Holbrook, whose father, Major George Holbrook, was an apprentice of Paul Revere.
So that's pretty cool. And I did a little research about the bells, and the bells weigh about 2,000 pounds. And there's a website where you can buy some of these bells, and the cost is about, anybody want to make a guess on what the value of these bells are?
25,000.
25? It could be in that range, whether I was seeing about 15,000, Dave.
Wow.
Yeah, and it depends on the individual bell and the year and the maker. And so I even saw one had sold that was made by Paul Revere, but I didn't see a price on it because it was already sold. But
One other one?
there's I wanted to point out this bell wheel. This is incredible work done by Dave Hewey. Do you want to say anything about it, Dave? I've got more pictures of it coming up.
Nope, show the other pictures.
Yep.
Historical documents report that in 1861, this bell from the old Haverhill Town Hall was acquired for the meeting house through the efforts of William B. Sanders to call the worshipers to church. The bell also tolled for the deaths of President Lincoln. Imagine that, 1865 and Garfield in 1881, and for funeral processions to the parish burying grounds, which now is Walnut Cemetery. The bell maker Holbrook followed Revere's bell design and metal composition. And you can see that on their website. The East Parish Meeting House bell is a special treasure for the meeting house today. The brides and grooms and visitors have great enjoyment ringing the bell. Neighbors enjoy hearing the bell tone and knowing the building and the bell are being appreciated. Link to the national list. Our bell is actually listed on the national list of historic bells cast in Medway, 1840 to 1849, and our bell is on that listing, and there's a link on the page that Bobby just skipped over.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's going on 8 o'clock, so I'm gonna have to. I don't want to lose people.
2015 restoration period, the exterior and interior of the East Parish, the steeple, belfry steeple all came off. 2000, the steeple was moved. 2006, the belfry was removed, and it sat while we did fundraising for several years, 14 years, before we were able to restore it back up to the rooftop.
Okay. Okay, in 2010, the meeting house was listed on Massachusetts most endangered historic properties, and that was not a great list to be on, but we did get some recognition that there was a huge need there. And then in 2011, due to the efforts of Shannon and Timothy Orwig, who filled out a 74-page detailed application to be on the national and the state registers of historic places, and successfully were accepted to the National Register of Historic Places. And that was a great list to be on, because then we were able to qualify for a lot more grants, historic preservation grants. Okay, 2012 and ongoing, we were awarded quite a few Methuen Festival of Trees grants. There was a matching grants, so we had to do the fundraising to come up with the equal amount of money as the grant that they would give us. And during this time, we also won Massachusetts Preservation Project Fund grants, and we needed a new roof and just so many different repairs which are coming up. And there was an extensive search for a deed, because the grantees wanted proof of a deed, the grantors. But we searched and searched and couldn't find one, so we came up with a creative solution, and we requested the mayor and city council sign a proclamation of ownership stating that the East Parish Meeting House is owned by the East Parish Meeting House Society. And the city council agreed, and this proclamation satisfied all our grantors. Okay, in 2012, Michael W. Roffo and fellow scouts painted the new steeple for Michael's Eagle Scout project. And there's the old, and the new one is not in this picture, but this is this Michael.
Thank you, Mikey.
At the old one.
History is welcome.
Good, excellent. All right, I love that news article. All right, I remember they called us and they had to go out in the snow, and just, like on an hour's notice, I'm coming right over. Can I get your picture? So they did. That's Mike and Mike looking in the belfry. Okay, there's another view of that, and here we go. Dave's beautiful work. David Hewey I'm not gonna say restoring, because he probably had to build this whole thing from scratch, right, Dave?
They restored.
He used the model of the old one as a template.
We actually did use
Many
some
parts from the
original
old one.
parts.
Yep.
Oh, okay, excellent, excellent. Okay.
But the joinery and the sizing and everything was copied exactly. That's what-
All right, and David Hewey coordinated the entire bell tower restoration, the belfry, which is this part holding the bell wheel, which we saw, the steeple restoration, and all the reinstallation. He did it all. All right, and here's the detailed pictures I was referring to about Dave using the template of the old bell wheel. This is what the bell rope holds attaches to this, and this is how you ring the bell. And Dave reconstructed.
Steamed and bent and like the
Mm.
original.
Mm-hmm. And Murray Hewey also did a lot on the meeting house, and we miss him. He passed away in 2021, and his funeral services were held at the meeting house. And we thank them for all their ingenuity and beautiful craftsmanship. Okay, we had a few fundraisers, and at one point we made this sign to help the community find out how much fundraising we were getting. We actually didn't get too much fundraising from the community, but we did end up winning about $200,000 worth of grants over the years. So we were able to accomplish a lot thanks to the grants. All right, and finally, the big day, July 10th, 2014, reinstallation of the bell. Okay, and Dave Hewey's in these pictures, and there's the bell and the belfry and the steeple, everything ready to go back up on the roof. And it went up in stages. You can see a few pictures here. Want to see what's happening here, Dave Hewey?
I'm saying,
Well, we had to take the bell out of the belfry because it was too heavy to lift all at once. So the bell was removed through the roof. We made the roof removable as well.
Brilliant
And
idea.
like I said, like Bobby said, things were actually assembled in stages. The belfry rebuilt was the first thing to go up. Then the bell had dropped in through the top of it and set into the cradle. And then the roof could go on, and then the steeple could go on top of the roof. So it was an all-day process and several stages, and
go to the next pictures, Bobby.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's a great one.
that's placing the belfry on the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Next.
Can't imagine how the colonials were able to do this.
They built it a stick at a time.
Yeah, they went up there.
Oh, okay. All right, there's a video of this whole procedure, getting all these parts up on the roof, and it's there's the link there. It's on our Facebook, and I believe there's something on YouTube as well. Yeah, I think Haverhill Community Television has a couple of videos of us up there on YouTube. Okay, here's the crew. Sarin, Keith, Dave, and Jean, who were instrumental in putting all of this back up on the roof that day. And how beautiful it looks. The neighborhood was just so appreciative after 14 years of having that off, just to have it back on again. And we even made the front page of the Haverhill Gazette, and the headline was "The Sound of Centuries." And then just 10 days after the steeple was replaced, we got to work on repainting the outside, and the work began. It was Hoyt Painting, local contractor, and they repainted the entire meeting house. Took about 2 weeks, and stunning results. I wish it still looked that way, but it's been 10 years now, and it needs another repainting on the front. So we're working on that for the spring. We've applied for another grant, and there's some repairs of clapboards and corner boards and different things that are needed. And also a lot of trees in the background that might be dangerous to the building. We need to try to take a few of those down. So there's always maintenance. I mean, the hardest part is done, but there's always maintenance. Okay, we discovered we needed a new roof along the way, which we really didn't even know, but once we got a good look at it, we found out we had to replace that roof, which we did with help from State Preservation Fund. Okay, then we worked on interior restorations. There was squirrel damage and porcupine damage, and plaster was cracked and aged and falling off the walls. The floors softened and needed replacement. So a lot of different contractors and friends helped with that. These window frames were beautifully restored by Murray Hewey. which had been chewed by squirrels. Just unbelievable. Some squirrels got in and they couldn't get a way out, so they chewed their way out. Or some of them didn't even get out. They just died in the meeting house because they couldn't get out. Dave Hewey, as I say here, restored the flooring in a lot of places. And another amazing thing was the plaster. Look how bad it looks in here. It's just unbelievable. It had yellowed and cracked over the almost 2 decades, and animal damage. And we were able to get Volant plastering. They are the best. I know Rock's Village Hand Tub House has used them as well. Steve Volant, those work is just amazing. And this is the result, just unbelievably. This is so beautiful that we've been able to have movies in here and show caroling. We can project the words on the walls because he did such a beautiful job. Okay, we also had some holes that had to be repaired, and Todd Michelle did a super job for us in repairing these holes. And then Hoyt Painting also painted all the wainscoting inside and these gray doors, and they also did a beautiful job. And it was just like the day before this was happening. So we were all intent on having everything beautiful so that Jessica Santos and Jake Gagne could have their wedding on October 2014, which they did.
They live right in the neighborhood.
Yep, Jessica grew up right down the street on Middle Road, and she said she always wanted to get married there. So she had told us a year or two ahead, and we had that goal. So that's kind of a nice story. And Jess and Jake have 2 beautiful girls. Now they were the girls in the picture ringing the bell a few slides back, and they started coming back to events. So we're just thrilled to have them, the next generations.
8:10, Bobby.
Okay, I'm finishing up. Okay, finally, some new ideas for special events. We started having music, caroling, open mic nights, in addition to the traditional beloved potlucks. And here we have 2 great bands, the Greenleaf Musicians. And here's our caroling, and that's our other band, the Riversiders, led by Diane Smith, shown here leading our caroling and camaraderie 2003. And I think Christine is in this picture somewhere singing up there in the front row. Okay, a couple of favorite winter and Christmas photos. And we have beautiful acoustics in the meeting house and have had many open mic nights now. Caroling has become a treasured annual event. And so many restorations have been completed, but we just need the maintenance now. The rest of this is we don't just want to give thanks to the Haverhill Public Library Special Collections and to Allison Colby Campbell. She loaned us a couple of beautiful photographs, to Lindsay Paris and Matt Belfiore for their beautiful video photography. They included the East Parish Meeting House in their television special Christmas in New England. And we were just thrilled to see the meeting house in that special documentary. And we want to thank Haverhill Gazette and reporters, and just acknowledge Chase, Patricia Traynor O'Malley, and additional sources for tonight. Slideshow was Wikipedia, historical documents, the National Register of Historic Places application, and some of our grant applications. We gathered all this together to come up with tonight's presentation. And the last few things are, this is the link to this beautiful PBS special that has opens and closes with the pictures of the meeting house. And there we are in a snowstorm, of course, nice. And again, these are the pictures that you can find in that documentary. And this is the way we decorate for Christmas, thanks to Shannon, our decorator extraordinaire. We had a caroling, and we also had a Polar Express movie night, which was a huge hit with the next generations, and hope to do that again next year. There's a lot of paintings of the meeting house, and this is one that hangs in the Como Funeral Home. And this is Allison's photo in the fall, Allison Colby Campbell in her winter photograph. And then we have a few photographs on Google. We were contacted by Google in 2019 and asked if we wanted them to come out and take some professional photographs to go up on a digital website. So we partnered with Google, and they took some beautiful pictures that you can find on a Google search. Okay, and is this just a couple of our advertisements? We have a website for weddings and a Facebook page and a Google page, and we're on Wikipedia too. All right, and just in closing, next gens are starting to take an interest in the building's events and the maintenance. And we'll have more events planned with them for 2024. And at this time, we appreciate all comments, questions, clarifications, corrections, additions, omissions before this goes up on YouTube for the education and enjoyment of all the future generations. Copyright Roberta, Roffo, and Shannon Hewey. Thanks for being here.
Can't hear you.
Anybody have a question or comment?
I just wanted to say thank you guys for the information. It was really informative. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for your interest.
Thank you.
Thanks very
welcome.
much. Very good.
Yeah, this was very interesting. I had always heard and I
Of
had
the East
read in
Parish
my-
Meeting House. It's right up on their website.
Great job. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And
Jay, what were you saying? No, he muted his mouth.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, so anybody who wants to see a video of East Parish Meeting House with Shannon, Hewey, and David, go to hcmedia.org, Haverhill Community Media. I had the show posted tonight on their website. So just go to hcmedia.org. I don't know, Shannon, when did we do that? About 14 years ago, maybe?
And a couple. Yep.
Yeah. But it's there and it's free, and you get to see the upstairs where David did his work, as well as get a nice tour of the inside and meet people, Shannon among others, who gave us a little more history. So I had that posted tonight for everybody. It was a
Oh,
great
thank you.
program, by the way.
thank you very
you.
much. We had fun doing it. Do we still have Robin on here?
Yes, I'm
Oh,
still
hi,
on.
Robin. Hi,
This
Robin.
was just great. Thank you so much. And we look forward to doing more of these at the Whittier Birthplace for more, learning about other historical places in Haverhill and in the area. So thank you so much.
So next month is going to be Covered Bridges, and that's for February. And then March is going to be the history of Rocks Village, which we're looking forward to seeing that as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank you for
everyone for
coming.
attending.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.